Hello and welcome to Pock and Rob. Back in January 2022, I did a video where I talked about what I knew was coming in the year and some conjecture and thoughts about what might be coming. And I said this. There are consistent rumours that towards the end of 2022, we are likely to get a 9th album from Muse, which will be their first since Simulation Theory came out 4 years ago. Lo and behold, in August 2022, we got Muse's 9th album. I was proven right. And so today's video is going to be a ranking of the 9 Muse albums, including that new release, Will of the People. Before I go into the ranking, I'd remind you to like the video, hit the subscribe button and the bell to receive notifications of future content, and let's go in with my ranking. Now, many Muse fans would potentially say that they've never released a bad album. I thoroughly disagree. And at number 9, I have placed the sole Muse album that I really do not like. And it's 2015's Drones. I can't get into this album at all. I don't know whether it's the fact that the two best known tracks of it are Dead Inside and Psycho, and Psycho seemed to be a bit of a jump the shark moment for me, and believe me, there is plenty of opportunities for Muse to do that. They are the kings of bombastic rock. But the album Drones, I just really dislike. Something comes 9th, and in the case of Muse, Drones was an easy pick at position 9. At number 8, I have placed 2012's The Second Law. Up to this point, Muse were kind of viewed as being they could do no wrong. There was some negative notices for the Resistance, but they still had a huge amount of success. They were approached to do the 2012 theme song for the Olympics, and they produced Survival. Now, Survival is an absolutely bonkers song. I don't know, even to this day, whether or not I actually like it or not. Follow-up single was Madness, which I don't think I like. The best thing on Second Law is Panic Station. And Panic Station is the first track that they released with expletives on, which meant that the CD carried a parental advisory sticker. Looking back, Matt Bellamy has been quoted as saying that that whole kind of thing about they could do no wrong was proven wrong with the Second Law. I don't think the band particularly like it. I'm not fond of it, but Panic Station alone is what probably gets it just above Drones. That and the fact that Madness and Supremacy and Survival are fine gives it its 8th placing. At number 7, I have placed their debut from 1999. It's Showbiz. This isn't an album I particularly enjoy that much, but there are some absolutely great tracks on here. And it's those great tracks that rise above the previous 2 albums. So things like Unintended, which I think is an absolutely beautiful ballad. Muscle Museum is terrific. Cave, I really, really like Cave, and Uno, all of which were the ones that were lifted from the album as singles. There was criticism of Muse at the time that they were too much like Radiohead. And listening to the album recently, I've got to agree, they sound like Radiohead clones on so many of the tracks on here, but they were better than that. And Showbiz is a fairly inauspicious start, really. At number 6, I have placed an album that many Muse fans will put right at the top. It's Origin of Symmetry. I've got 2 copies of it. I've got the 20th anniversary remix edition, and there's my CD copy of it. The accusations of Radiohead clone are still knocking around in my listening when I listen to Origin of Symmetry. But Newborn, Bliss, Plug-in Baby, Citizen Erased, Microcuts. It's an album that I struggle to warm to, but what I warm to, I think, is top draw. Newborn in particular, I think is absolutely phenomenal. It's my number 6. And at number 5, I have placed Will of the People. So Muse themselves have described this album as being a greatest hits, that's all new material. And listening to it, I can't disagree with that. So every single track seems to hark back to some other period of Muse's previous 8 albums. So the title track, Will of the People, for me, the rhythm completely replicates Psycho from Drones. A song I don't like, but is one of the ones I actually prefer off the album. But I like the rhythm, and they've taken that rhythm and they've put the Will of the People chant over it, and it works for me so much better. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was to go and get a mashup of Psycho and Will of the People and put them together and it would work. There's also strains of Survival from The Second Law in that Will of the People song. The next track is Compliance. That for me is probably the song I know most on there. It was the trailing single. Listened to it quite a bit early on. That wouldn't be out of place on Simulation Theory. We then have Liberation, which is more of a ballad style, but has got that building towards a big release of bombast. That for me could easily sit on Black Holes and Revelations. It's got elements of things like Soldier's Poem in it, but also the Resistance, and particularly the United States of Eurasia. We move into Won't Stand Down. Again, I hear elements of Survival or The Second Law, with some vibes from Absolution and an edge on the guitars that really reminds me of the origin of Symmetry. Then we have Ghosts, and Ghost is like the softer moments from Absolution, but I have to say, I think it's a bit whiny. And that reminds me again of things like Soldier's Poem. Now, Soldier's Poem was recorded originally for Absolution, but was held over until Black Holes and Revelations. So that whole kind of slightly softer Absolution feel comes in for Ghost for me. We then hit You Make Me Feel Like It's Halloween, and that easily could have sat on Simulation Theory. There's a certain amount of the best track off Second Law, which as you know, I mentioned was Panic Station. Kill or Be Killed easily could have sit on Absolution. Verona has elements of the Resistance with The Second Law, that kind of the transition period of Do No Wrong into Boy Did We Do Wrong. Euphoria is almost a copy of Knights of Sidonia from Black Holes and Revelations, with a big old dollop of Hysteria from Absolution thrown in. And then finally, the last track is one that I can't mention on here. It's We Are Effing Effed. And for me, the worst thing on the record. This totally evokes Drones, the album I really don't like. The vocals have got a bit of a masking on it, exactly like Psycho or Dead Inside. I'd be happier with the album without We Are Effing Effed on it. Overall, for me, Will of the People is probably a 3.5 to maybe a 4-star album. I like it, I don't love it. And as a result, it sits right in the middle of my Muse rankings at number 5. So moving into number 4, I have placed Simulation Theory, an album that I don't think gets a lot of love. Now, I like 80s sensibilities, I like 80s music, I like synth pop stuff, and this is Muse doing the 80s. The cover replicates Stranger Things, which is set in the 80s, and as you probably already know, has caused Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush to hit number 1. There's werewolf thematics on the cover again, which makes me think of Thriller and films like Teen Wolf. So they're clearly homaging the 80s. I like the title track. I think Algorithm is a great opener. Propaganda is a decent song. I think Simulation Theory is an album that's probably grown on me since I've listened to it a few more times than when it first came out. Like I say, I like the 80s stuff, and therefore Simulation Theory is in my wheelhouse. And number 3, I have placed The Resistance, the last album from, I think, their best decade. Resistance contains Uprising, which is an absolutely brilliant track. I really, really like Uprising. The title track, The Resistance, is great. United States of Eurasia, I love. It sounds like Queen to me. Very much sounds like Queen. I think the album takes a bit of a downturn, but Exogenesis is an interesting track, or a 3-part track, really. And it's probably the lack of absolute bangers that puts The Resistance just at number 3, ahead of my number 2 pick, which is Black Holes and Revelations. Now, Black Holes and Revelations is an album that I blow a little bit hot and cold on. And if I was to do this ranking again in maybe a year's time, I'd probably put Resistance above it. So what is it about Black Holes and Revelations that puts it at number 2 rather than number 3, where Resistance sits? And I think it's the quality of the songs that I absolutely adore on the album. So Starlight, what an absolutely great song. There is Nights of Sidonia, which is an amazing closer. The album opener, Take a Bow, which is incredible, but at the same time uncomfortable. I like Map of the Problematique. I really like Supermassive Black Hole. And then there is Invincible. And Invincible is, whilst it's not my absolute favourite Muse track, it's in my top 100 of all time. I think Invincible is absolutely terrific. My favourite track clearly on Black Holes and Revelations, and such a good song that's why Black Holes, for me, vaults above The Resistance. And at number 1, if you've watched my 2000s top 15 video, it will be no surprise. It's my second favourite album from the entirety of that decade. It's Absolution. Absolution is almost a near perfect album. So on this album, we've got Thoughts of a Dying Atheist, Stockholm Syndrome, the title track, Sing for Absolution. We have Butterflies and Hurricanes, which was actually probably the first song that really turned me on to how good Muse actually were. Hysteria, which is my all-time favourite Muse track. It's an amazingly good song. It's near perfect, as I say, because the final track, Ruled by Secrecy, is, I think, it's a downer to end on. I don't particularly like the track. It drags the album out of perfect territory for me. I forgot to mention Endlessly. I really, really like Endlessly. I know when I put Absolution on that I'm going to enjoy and have a great time with this album, right up until the last track. And as a result, Absolution sits streets ahead of the rest of Muse albums at number 1. And that's not to say there's so much about Muse music that I really enjoy, but only Absolution truly holds up as an album for me. So that's my ranking of the 9 Muse albums. Let me know in the comments what you think. Argue with me about your favourite Muse album. Like I said, there's so many Muse tracks that I like, so many Muse singles that I like, that I know I'm going to revisit them at some point with the tracks of my years. But until next time, I'd remind you to like, subscribe, hit the bell. I'll be back in a week with another video. It's a new month, so it's highly likely that it will be a Beatles related video, and almost certainly I will be doing my track by track ranking of Paul McCartney's Press to Play. But until next week, thanks for watching.